but hi everyone. My name is Phoebe Kim. I'm currently a senior cloud solutions architect at VMware, and I volunteer at Women Who Code Cloud track specifically as a speaker and a volunteer. So you can find me on Twitter. You can message me if you have any questions or reach out anytime. My handle is Phoebe SY Kim. So let's get started to what you came for. So we're going to talk about VMware Cloud on AWS today. So a quick overview. So VMware Cloud on AWS is a jointly engineered solution by VMware, of course, and AWS Cloud. So this allows customers to access a lot of the innovative native AWS services and to help organizations with their app modernization strategies, right? Modernizing a lot of their legacy applications to take advantage of these AWS native services and also maybe take advantage of some SaaS offerings, right? So this helps organizations just modernize their technology overall. Another benefit or use case for VMware Cloud on AWS is for customers who want to move to the cloud, right? Migrate to the cloud from their on-premises data center. So this actually allows organizations to move without having to change a lot of what they have, especially if they are a VMware shop, right? Essentially, we'll get into the architecture of VMware Cloud on AWS, but essentially is vSphere on AWS hardware. So if an organization is already running their infrastructure on this virtualized vSphere environment, you don't actually have to change anything in a sense to go to the cloud and not have to take care of the hardware anymore if that is where the organization wants to go. So you can migrate your applications with little to almost no downtime. You can reduce maybe the risk or the cost associated with refactoring your applications if you were to move to the native cloud. But you don't have to move to the cloud and call it done, right? You can actually have a hybrid cloud situation as well, where an organization wants to keep their on-premises data center and infrastructure, but also maybe have an option to store some of their applications or serve them from a cloud environment. So in that sense, you could have this hybrid operations between an on-premises data center and AWS or SDDC on an AWS. So this kind of helps an organization operate consistently across these different environments, different clouds. I've seen organizations use this as maybe a DR, disaster recovery solution, right? Maybe they have everything going on in their on-premises data center and something happens to it, then they would move their applications, at least the production and critical applications, to the VMware Cloud on AWS so that you minimize the downtime. So that's some of the use cases for VMware Cloud on AWS. So VMware Cloud on AWS is available in a lot of different regions worldwide. So these are some of the AWS regions where this service is available. And of course, we are adding more and more as we go. This has been last updated actually end of last year. So it's a little bit outdated in that sense, but yeah, they are adding locations. And especially if your organization is the US government where they need GovCloud, that's also being added as well. Now let's look at the high-level architecture of VMware Cloud on AWS. So if you think about, a data center, right? A customer would have a data center with hardware, compute, storage, and network, of course. And then in this case, we are thinking about VMware customers where they have a software-defined data center using VMware virtualization products within their environment, within their on-premises data center. So they would have vSphere for their compute virtualizations, vSAN for their storage virtualization, and NSX for network virtualization. And of course, with that, this SDDC would have a vCenter server, which is the management component of the virtualized infrastructure. So essentially, VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC is exactly that. So vSphere, vSAN, and SX with vCenter server. But instead of having them on an on-premises hardware, which is owned by the customer, right? It's leveraging the AWS infrastructure. So in that sense, the customer now is not managing at least the hardware portion of it, and we'll get into this shared responsibility model of VMware Cloud on AWS, where it will make a little more sense. But essentially, VMware Cloud on AWS is the VMware SDDC on top of the AWS hardware. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this does bring the organization's applications and workloads closer to AWS native services. So if an organization wants to take advantage of any native services or modernize their applications leveraging these services, it's easier for them and they have access to those services there within AWS. So a little more about this shared responsibility model. So VMware does have a detailed white paper out about just this concept of shared responsibility model, but I'll go over it really quickly for VMware Cloud on AWS service. So there are three main entities to the service. There is VMware, there is AWS, right? That's the jointly engineered solution. And then there's the customer, right? Or the organization who is consuming this service. So within the data center, we're going to start from bottom up. So at the bottom, we have the physical infrastructure or the hardware for compute, network, and storage, like you would in an on-premises data center. But in VMware Cloud on AWS, this is all AWS infrastructure, and AWS is responsible for taking care of this hardware, replacing them if something is broken, making sure that it's functioning as intended, right? So AWS takes care of the hardware for you. Now, from a VMware perspective, VMware is the one that provides the software infrastructure, right? That software-defined data center. So we provide the vSphere for compute and SX for network, vSAN for storage. They take care of the life cycle of the software. So for example, if you had on-premises data center and you had VMware products, right? It's not that you would have to do the upgrade, right? Every once in a while, major versions are released and you would have to go in, make sure everything is compatible with the version you want to go to with all of the products that you have. So it's a big endeavor for the most part, especially with major upgrades. But now with at least VMware Cloud on AWS, that's not the sole responsibility of the customer anymore. VMware helps you with the lifecycle management of the software portions, and they provide you with a basic infrastructure to start building that software-defined data center. Now, from the customer perspective, from the SDDC, VMware doesn't essentially deploy it for you, right? So you would have to create that VMware Cloud organization and then create a software-defined data center from that. And from the software-defined data center, one of the biggest thing is that you have to configure the network and configure the security of that network in order for SDDC to function and for you to secure the SDDC the way that you have to do for your organization. And of course, any workloads that you put into the VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC is the responsibility of the customer. So if you deploy virtual machines, any of its operating system is antivirus, let's say backup, or any configuration management related to the virtual machines is the responsibility of the customer. And that also comes back to data as well, right? Any data that you put into or store in VMware Cloud on AWS is the responsibility of the customer to take care of and to secure. Same with giving access management. So making sure that you only give access to people with appropriate roles that they need to do their jobs. So this is the shared responsibility model. I went through it pretty quickly, but there is a white paper out there. So you can read a little more about the shared responsibility model. Now, what I like to do is actually switch from slides and go and show you the VMware Cloud console. So give me one moment. Okay. I hope you guys can see the SDDC VMware Cloud console. I don't know if anyone can verify for me here real quick. I think we're good. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so I'm logged into VMware Cloud console where you have different services in VMware Cloud, right? It's not just VMware Cloud on AWS. So like, for example, for the organization that I'm a part of, we have access to VMware Cloud Assembly, VMware Cloud on AWS, VMware CodeStream, HCIX, Log Insight, vRealize Operations. So there's a lot of different services that you could take advantage of. But of course, today is just VMware Cloud on AWS. So this is the VMware Cloud on AWS software-defined data center. So you could obviously have more than one SDDC deployed in your organization. So as you can see, I have 2 of these deployed right now. If you were to create an SDDC, you would just click Create SDDC and ignore the zero cloud here. This is an internal feature, so you won't see that if you were ever to get started with VMware Cloud on AWS. But here in AWS, you can choose the region where you want to deploy the SDDC. So this is where the VMware Cloud on AWS service is available. So after you do that, you can actually deploy a single host deployment or a multi-host. So here the host is the EXXI host of VMware. Now, one thing you want to remember is that single host or a one host SDDC, it expires in 30 days. So it's one of those, trial run sort of deals. So you can still deploy it, and everything you put in there, you could put in, all your workloads and virtual machines and do whatever you want. But if you don't increase the size of that SDDC, then it will disappear in 30 days. Here, I will zoom in a little bit. I hope that's a little better. All right, so that's AWS, that's the region, that's the single host. Normally, you would choose the multi-host. At this moment, I believe the minimum number of hosts that you want to start with is 2. So if you can have a 2-host SDDC to start with, and then increase from there. Now, if you, let's say, increase from a 2-host to, let's say, 3-host, you actually cannot go back to 2. So 3 then it becomes the minimum. And then let's say you go to 4, you could still go back to 3. You just can't go back to 2. Anyway, so that's a single host, multi-host. But you also see this option called stretched cluster. So what stretched cluster is right now, if you deploy a SDDC that is not a stretched cluster, or you sometimes call it like standard cluster, then you deploy the SDDC is deployed to one AWS availability zone. Now, I'm not going to go into like what is AWS region and availability zone and all of that. But essentially, an availability zone is one domain, like failure domain, essentially within an AWS region. So an AWS region has multiple availability zones. Now, if you do a stretched cluster, what the deployment does is it stretches the cluster across two different availability zones within the same region. So here I chose US West Oregon as the region, right? And it has multiple availability zones. So if I do a stretched cluster, it's going to deploy half of the hosts in one availability zone and another half of the host in another availability zone, so that if you do have an availability zone failure, then not all of your production workloads or anything you have in the SDDC is affected, right? So this is more, usually we would recommend it to organizations that have really high availability requirements. Let's say 4 nines is the availability requirement that a stretched cluster should be able to achieve for an organization. So yes, it costs more, right? Because inherently you have more number of hosts. So where you can only have one or two, let's say 2 hosts for a multi-host that deploys into one availability zone. If you see, if I click the stretch cluster, it doubles that immediately or automatically, because it would deploy 2 in one AZ or availability zone and 2 in another AZ. So that's kind of my little spiel on stretch cluster. And now in terms of host types, there are 2 different host types that you can choose from the AWS hardware where the SDDC will be deployed. So there's i3 and i3EN. If you see, the main difference is that the i3EN has more storage. So if you know that your workloads are going to be extremely storage heavy or anything like that, we would normally recommend this. But usually most customers are okay with just i3. And actually, there is a VMware Cloud on AWS Sizer that you can use, which will tell you, maybe how many hosts you need, or which host type maybe would be better for you, depending on the type of workloads and the resources requirement for the workloads. And I think literally you can just go to Google and type VMware Cloud on AWS Sizer. Should come up. Yep. It says vmcsizer.vmware.com. I'll show you real quick. So yeah, you can see there's a quick sizer where you put a workload type. The workload type here, once you change it, it kind of gives you a different estimate of what the required resources would be. So, for databases, it's a little more heavier on the resources, there's like some VDI estimates as well that you can use. And you could put, your estimated number of VMs that you want. And so if you do like get recommendation, it would give you, how many hosts you might need and, which type. You can choose different type. And then it would, as you can see, because the i3EN host type has more storage available, actually reduces the number of hosts that you might need. So you could kind of play around. You could see all the different information about how the calculation has been done or the estimation. So it's a really neat tool that you can use. There's also a thing called Advanced Sizer. Now this allows you to enter more details. So you could get a better estimate for what you should do, how big your SDDC should be. So you can actually upload this, I think the CSV files or Excel files from RV tools or live optics. And then it would kind of give you that size from the data imported. You could actually manually enter the details here too. So this is similar to the quick sizer, but you can have multiple workload profiles. So obviously you're not going to have just database virtual machines or I don't know, just VDI clones, right? So you can identify different profiles to have all these different types of virtual machines for a more accurate estimate. All right, so yep, that's the sizer. So I'll go back to the SDDC. So I'm just going to put like test here. I'm not actually going to deploy it, but if you go to next, the next requirement to creating a SDDC is to connect it to an AWS account. So before you create an SDDC, you do need an AWS account. So create your AWS account and then you can connect to it. What you do essentially is you create one account and then it will ask you to go to that AWS console and run a cloud formation template, which kind of does all of that background deployment of like IAM roles and the VPC and all of that. I think this one is just the IAM roles. But anyway, you need to connect to an AWS account here for your VMware Cloud on AWS setup. So I have that here. We'll continue. And then from there, it's going to ask you to choose a VPC that you have in that AWS account you've connected to see where basically your SDDC can leverage the native AWS services. As you can see, like this is a pretty nice diagram actually, where on the left side, you have the VMware Cloud on AWS, and then the right side is your native AWS account. Now there's the VMware Cloud VPC. That's where your VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC will be with your EXXI host and all of the VMware virtualized network. And then you have the AWS VPC, and that's just native AWS environment where you can deploy your EC2 instances, you can have other services, and there is direct connectivity between these environments for your applications if you choose to leverage AWS services. Now here you choose the subnet that you want to use for the chosen VPC. So as you can see, you choose one of them. It doesn't necessarily matter which one you want to leverage. Now, if you do a stretched cluster, this section is going to ask you to choose two different subnets, because if you have a stretched cluster, you would have the hosts deployed across two different availability zones within the region. So I'll ask you to choose two. I'm just going to select whatever just to show you guys what's next. Now, this asks you to give a management subnet. There is a default is 10.2/16 is the default. You can keep it that way. It doesn't necessarily matter. I think the one thing you want to be careful of here is you want to choose a management subnet range that does not overlap with any other networks that connect to the SDDC. So for example, let's say you have the on-premises data center and you're going to extend some networks from there to the VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC, like in the future to migrate workloads or use it for disaster recovery, whatever the use case is, right? Then let's say in your on-premises, you are using 10.2.0016 for whatever reason, then you want to give a different subnet here. And when you give a subnet, be careful, there are reserved CIDRs, so don't use these. But the CIDR block size gives you how many hosts that you can have within that SDDC. And this is important because this is not something you can change after deployment. So let's say you gave a /23 and it says you can have up to 27 hosts. It depends a little bit on how you're using the host and things like that. It says up to 27. It could be like 24, 25, depending on the usage. But anyway, let's say you gave a CIDR block for the management subnet at /23. And then now you're at 27 hosts and you want to add more. Well, you can't unless you just deploy a whole new SDDC that with a bigger CIDR. So you kind of want to keep that in mind. This is more of an AWS limitation because it's related to how VPCs are set up. And if you're familiar with AWS VPCs, you create that CIDR and give the VPC a CIDR, and you can't change it once the VPC is deployed. So this is the same way. So just make sure you give enough CIDR size just so you can be more flexible in the future. Normally, I would just say try to give the /16, and you kind of don't have to worry about it since it's up to like 4,000 hosts. So you would give the management subnet, and then you would start the deployment. Now, the charges, it tells you to confirm that you're aware. The charges for the VMware Cloud on AWS service starts as soon as your SDDC is done deploying. So, and then of course, the pricing is per host hour consumed for each host. So you would just have to check those, and then you would deploy the SDDC, which I'm not going to do for this demo, but the SDDC deployment takes, I would say, like 60 to 90 minutes. It depends on how many hosts you have in the SDDC. But it doesn't take, forever. It's just a couple of hours. And then once you come back, of course, you'll have your SDDC ready to go. So like, for example, this one, it's ready. I just have a single host. This is where I use for demo, and it's internal, so I get to have it more than 30 days. But this is kind of how we do it. And if you want to add the host, it's really easy, actually. You just click add host. And then you could actually add more than one host. You can choose how many hosts you want to add to the SDDC. And then it'll do its thing. It will maybe take, I would say, like 30 minutes, 45 minutes or so to add a host manually to the cluster. So it's really easy to add a host. And you can have multiple host clusters within the SDDC as well. So you can definitely do that. Now, one thing I want to show you guys today is Elastic DRS. So DRS stands for Distributed Resource Scheduler. And by default, it has the storage scale out policy, but there are more other policies. So if you go to actions and go to EDRS settings, you could actually see the different policies. So right now we're at the storage scale out, which just means that if your cluster storage utilization hits, I think it's 70%, I forget the number on top of my head at the moment, but it says this is like 70 or 80% utilization, then VMware Cloud on AWS will automatically add a host for you. So that's the default policy. And it doesn't actually remove the host if your storage utilization goes back down or anything like that. So it just adds it and then you're done, right? So that's one. And then there are a couple other ones. So let's just take a quick look. This one is called Optimize for Best Performance. So in that sense, it adds hosts more quickly depending on the CPU utilization, memory utilization, or storage utilization. So if one of those hits the threshold, which I can't remember on top of my head, but it's 70, I think it's 70% for each of those, then it'll add a host. But this policy will actually remove the host as well if your utilizations for CPU, memory, and storage, all three of them, are below a certain threshold. So remember, the policies add a host if only one of your resource utilization gets past the maximum threshold, but it will only remove if all three resource utilizations are below the minimum threshold for CPU, memory, and storage, all three. So you can do that for best performance. It's the similar story for optimize for lowest cost. This one has higher maximum thresholds so that you don't, it doesn't add the host as quickly as the optimize for best performance. And that's, for cost, right? Because if you add more hosts, obviously you have to pay more. So it optimizes for that. Now, the last one here is optimized for rapid scale out. So this one is similar to the default one in that it actually doesn't remove any hosts. It's only going to add hosts, but it adds multiple hosts actually. So you can choose the increment in which the hosts will be added. So when one of the utilization is past the maximum threshold, like for example, if I choose this one, it's going to add 4 hosts when that happens. And actually this one, the hosts are not going to be removed anytime. So you would have to manually go and remove the host if your utilization goes down and you realize that you don't need as many hosts anymore. So these are the 4 different settings for Elastic DRS. And it's really nice because it keeps you, it helps you maintain an optimal number of hosts within your SDDC without you having to observe it every minute of your day, right? So it's kind of automates that process for you and helps you make sure that you have enough resources for the workloads that are running in the SDDC with Elastic DRS. All right, I will keep going. If you guys have any questions, of course, I know this is a lot of information. So if you have any questions, just keep putting them in the chat or the Q&A section. But for now, I will keep on going. So I talked about Elastic DRS and Stretch Cluster. And actually, another thing I wanted to include in this introduction webinar is called hybrid linked mode. Now, I don't actually have the hybrid linked mode set up in this specific SDDC to show you, but I have created, this is a blog, you guys can just find it. It's a getting started videos for VMware Cloud on AWS that I created last month. So it's very recent. And actually, if you wanted to see how adding a host or EDRS or even the stretch cluster to see how those work, I have these YouTube videos here. But I wanted to show you the hybrid linked mode video because basically what hybrid linked mode does is allows you to see the on-premises vSphere environment and the VMware Cloud on AWS environment from one vSphere client, so that you don't have to go back and forth just to see your inventory or manage them. So this is really it's a very nice feature, which I will try to show if it ever loads. Let's see. So essentially what you have to do is you have an appliance called vCenter Cloud Gateway that you have to download the ISO essentially. So you download it from VMware Cloud on AWS tools or the VMware Customer Connect site. And then once you download it, you go through the deployment process, and you provide the on-premises environment where you're going to deploy this vCenter Cloud Gateway. So that's what I'm doing here, is going through and deploying this vCenter Cloud Gateway appliance in the on-premises data center I had for the demo. So after this deployment is done, I fast forwarded here, of course, so that you guys don't have to watch it. You actually just launch and go to that appliance /GW-platform. So you would connect to the vCenter Cloud Gateway. And here you can see that hybrid management section. So you would go to the hybrid management to create that hybrid linked mode with your VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. So you go through this setup. Here is where you would provide information about the VMware Cloud on AWS environment that you want to connect to. So you would provide that information, provide the SSO information of the VMware Cloud on AWS, and then this is where you want to connect it to. So that's the on-premises environment. So you keep going. And I'll just fast forward a little bit. So this is when the hybrid link mode is done. So once it's done, and you could now go and launch the hybrid management, and when you launch it, what it's going to do is it's going to actually open the on-premises vSphere client. But as you can see, I'll pause it. As you can see, this second here, where my other mouse also is your on-premises vSphere client data center. And then you actually you can see here, the on-premises, VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC as well. So you could see both inventory from one place. So which makes basically your life a lot easier from an administrator perspective, right? Where you don't have to go to each of these SDDC vSphere clients to manage and configure your workloads. You can actually do it from one place. So I know I went through it extremely quickly, but this is one of the cool, neat features, I think, to make management a little more, a little easier from the administrative perspective. So it's called hybrid linked mode. So you can check this out or watch the video. It gives you more details about the deployment and the configuration, and some of the prerequisites that you might need to set up the hybrid linked mode. So I have these that you can check out. If you can't find it, of course, you can just reach out to me and I can send you the link to this as well. But this is overall what I had. I think one more thing we can finish off with is kind of maybe the network structure of VMware Cloud on AWS. So if it loads, okay, that's nice. This is an overview of the network of VMware Cloud on AWS. So if you see, well, if I could try to zoom in a little more. Okay. So yes, I know there's no IPsec. Okay. So if you look at VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC, it uses NSXT as that software-defined networking layer. And it has two different NSXT routers. For one, management gateway, and two is the compute gateway. Now, the management gateway has subnets where all of your management appliances are deployed automatically for you when you deploy an SDDC. So you cannot change any of the appliances there. You can't deploy anything to the management resource pool. Like that stuff is all managed by VMware, and it's really not your trouble anymore, which is one of the benefits of using VMware Cloud on AWS, right? Now, the compute gateway is where all your segments and your workloads are. So this is where you would deploy any of your workloads, your applications, whatever you want, any segments that you might want for those workloads, and you would connect them from there, and everything goes up and out from the compute gateway. So this is kind of this is how at least a very, very, very high level of the networking done in VMware Cloud on AWS out of the box. Now, if you want to connect to your on-premises environment, there are different options. So one, you can just use the public internet to connect with an on-premises environment. But two, you can have a direct connection as well to the on-premises environment. So like, for example, here, you can see that I have I'm using an AWS Direct Connect to connect to one of the on-premises site that I have available for different demos. So it's this, I mean, the networking part, we can talk about this for hours, but I just want to give you guys a quick overview. So you can use something like Direct Connect. You can have IPsec VPN configured as well to provide access to your on-premises data center. So these are some of the different ways, you can connect to your on-premises data center with the VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. Now, last thing I want to show you is VMware HCIX. So if you're not familiar with it, here within VMware Cloud on AWS, you can go to the add-ons tab where these are different services that are available for you to use with VMware Cloud on AWS. Now, one of them is called VMware HCIX. And this service is what allows you to connect or migrate your workloads to your VMware Cloud on SDDC from different VMware environments. So main use case will be that if you have workloads that you want to move from VMware, from the on-premises environment to VMware Cloud on AWS, you can definitely leverage VMware HCIX. And this comes included with your VMware Cloud on AWS subscription. So it's not an additional purchase, kind of like it says here, available for purchase for the site recovery, which is the disaster recovery as a service offering that we have for VMware Cloud on AWS. So VMware HCIX, that's its whole own deal. I will likely have one of the monthly webinar focused just on VMware HCIX and how you can use it to migrate your workloads. But of course, if you actually check out the getting started videos I created, one of them is focused on using VMware HCIX to migrate your workloads to VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. So you can kind of check that out beforehand too, if you'd like. So I know this was a lot of information, especially if you've never heard of VMware Cloud on AWS. But I hope that this was enough to kind of get you started maybe on VMware Cloud service. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out. There's lots of resources out there available for you as well if you are getting started on VMware Cloud on AWS. But this was more just a kind of intro of the service for you. And to talk a little bit about the next session that's coming up, we're actually going to have one of my colleagues on the same team join us. And he's going to do kind of a similar introduction to Google Cloud VMware Engine, which is a fairly new service and is similar to VMware Cloud on AWS. But that one, of course, is a joint solution with Google using Google Cloud. So he will walk through and present and tell you guys a little more about what Google Cloud VMware Engine is and some of its unique services and such. So that is in September. You can definitely check out the event date on the Women Who Code Cloud page. But I think this is all I have for today. I will stick around for the next 5 minutes if anybody has any questions, but thank you so much for joining, and I hope you found this session helpful.